Here we go.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm your host, Jay Jennings, and today my guest is film director, also producer and screenwriter, Larry Cohen. Welcome to the show, Larry.
Well, pleased to be here.
Larry is, as if you don't know, is the director of many cult horror films, such as God Told Me To, It's Alive, Return to Salem's Lot, and a few others that we'll be talking about in the course of this interview. Larry, your films, from which I've seen, tend to mix horror and comedy a lot of the time. Is this sort of a trademark of yours?
Well, it seems that's what it's become. People say they knew it was a Larry Cohen movie and they didn't see the credits, which is the best compliment you can get.
Now, when I see most of your films, it always says written by, so in essence, you write most of your own
All of
movies.
it, yes. I wouldn't want to direct a picture if I didn't write it.
So you never work on anybody else's, even though it's a Stephen King adaptation, you still would write the script to suit your directorial needs?
Yeah, well, the Stephen King thing that I did had really nothing to do with Stephen King's book. It was Warner Brothers said they wanted a picture called Return to Salem's Lot. Could I make up a picture? So I just sat down and created my own.
Right. Now, tell us about your first breakthrough film, because we're going to be taking a look at clips from the film that is, I think, your masterpiece, God Told Me To, but we'll be talking about a lot of the other films. It's Alive was your breakthrough film in 1974. Tell us about that.
Well, that was the first hit. That was a big hit. Well, you know, it was an idea that people thought basically was absurd, although there have been many movies about monster babies since. But that was the first monster baby picture.
And Rick Baker, who's a famous makeup guy, that was one of his first jobs, wasn't it?
He'd done on-set makeup for me on pictures like Black Caesar, which was a gangster movie I made, and on Bone, which was the first picture I made. He was the guy who came in and did the wounds and the holes in people's heads and stuff like that. And at that time, he was working with John Landis on a few projects.
Like Schlock and stuff.
Yeah. And then when I was going to make It's Alive, I said to him, now, why don't we sit down and we'll create the baby? So I kind of drew a picture of what I wanted, and then he went out and amplified upon it. We took something that was a little bit like the Kubrick baby at the end of 2001.
But added fangs.
And made it more horrific.
Right, because I think the only movie that rivaled, I think, how scary the baby was The Exorcist, which caused a stir at that time, too. Bernard Herrmann, a very famous composer, who's scored lots and lots of films. You got him to score both It's Alive and It Lives Again. Did you really like what he did for your films?
Oh, sure. I was thrilled that I got Benny Herrmann. I was told he wasn't available. He was doing The Exorcist, and apparently he had a fight with Friedkin, and Friedkin ran the picture, The Exorcist, for him in New York and said to him, I want you to write a better score than you wrote for Citizen Kane, at which time Benny said, then why didn't you make a better picture than Citizen Kane? So that was the end of their relationship, and I was called by someone who said, you know, he's not doing The Exorcist. He might be available. So I called him in London, got him on the phone. He liked young people. And I said, well, I'll send you a black and white dupe of the movie, and if you want to do it, fine.
Right.
And he called me up long distance and said, you know, I like this picture. I would like to do this for you.
And that's how it came to be.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we'll be talking about a few other of your films, as well as the one we're going to show a clip for right now. So we'll take a look at first and then discuss God Told Me To. Oh, there you are, Larry.
Yeah, I remember that day.
God Told Me To, which I think is one of the best horror films that were ever made, whether it's in the 40s or 50s or 70s or 80s, but we'll talk about that more. How did you come up for the original story of the whole concept?
Well, I might add that what they just saw was people being shot by a sniper who's up on the roof of a water tower.
Who later says, God told me to do it.
Yeah, that's
okay.
right.
But I mean, where did this whole concept come from?
Well, it came from the fact that there were a number of crimes committed over the years, and when people were asked why they did it, they said God had told them to do it. So I wondered what would happen if there was an epidemic of such crimes in New York City. And while we were shooting the picture, a man over in Holland, in Amsterdam, went into the museum and defaced the Night Watch by Rembrandt and said that God had told him to do it. That's why we were actually shooting the film. So it seemed appropriate.
Yeah, it fit right in. Now listen, for some of the people who don't know who are watching, the story, I guess, is about a cop and he meets this kind of like Jesus Christ alien creature, and he feels dizzy, and he's drawn to him, and he doesn't know why. Now, how did these two actors, Richard Lynch, who played the alien, and Tony LoBianco, who played the cop, how did they adapt to their roles? I mean, they are bizarre in the
Yeah,
least.
well, they didn't have much time together in reality. I mean, a lot of that stuff was shot separately, and the other guy wasn't even there.
Who wasn't there?
When Tony was there, Richard wasn't there, and when Richard was there, Tony wasn't there. Very often they were working with doubles, and so they really had very little time that they ever were on the set together.
Now, we're going to take a look at some more clips as the show progresses. But first, we're going to talk about the small controversy, which you told me before the show, there's no controversy, on exactly why God Told Me To had difficulty running in ads in newspapers when it came out. Was it because the title was offensive, or for why? I mean, I heard about that. Now
No, I think that the problem basically was it was an odd title, and people couldn't remember what the title of the picture was. People would say, you know, that movie of yours, God Made Me Do It? That was a good picture. And I'd say, no, it was called God Told Me To. People could not remember the title of the film. So that was the only problem with that, and it was retitled eventually Demon for the New York release of the film.
Right. Now, there's a lot of people in this movie: Deborah Raffin, Tony LoBianco, Richard Lynch, Andy Kaufman, stand-up comedian who plays, which we'll see in our next clip, he goes nuts on a rampage. So do we have that clip ready, or can we go to that right now? Okay, let's take a look. Did that cause any controversy whatsoever with any religious groups picketing the theaters when that came out?
I don't remember anything like that happening.
Whatsoever?
The police should have picketed us for ruining their parade.
That's
in New
right.
York.
You actually use that, in case you don't know that. This is real police during an actual Macy's Day Parade?
No, it's the St. Patrick's
Day Parade,
Yeah.
okay.
Thousands of cops on the streets of New York.
And you use them?
Proving you can do anything in New York City and get away with it.
And you didn't have to pay them, or?
No, we were lucky we didn't shoot them, right? I mean, you know, nowadays I don't know if you could do this anymore, running around with guns in the city of New York and
Right.
like a lunatic. But we did. I mean, I picked Andy Kaufman up a couple of nights before at the Improv in New York, where he was doing a comedy act, and I said, I know you're going to be a star someday, and I want to give you your first chance to be in a movie. So we put him in the scene, and then, of course, we shot most of that stuff without sound equipment. So when he lay on the ground and said, God told me to, it wasn't recorded. That's my voice. So years later, Andy said to me, you know, I don't understand how you could have had my voice in the picture when there was no sound that day and no microphone. I said, well, that wasn't you, Andy. That was me. He said, no, I know my own voice.
Yeah, right.
You know, that was my voice. I said, well, how could it be, Andy? You know there was no microphone. To his dying day, Andy always told me that it was him, not me.
Well, that's remarkable. Well, we're going to move on to another clip right now, Larry. And this is the scene where we actually show the religious riots, whether you stage this or not, as well as the weird stabbing of a police officer. Let's take a look at another clip from God Told Me To. For back then, but now kind of tame to, I think, just the cut-em-up slash and horror. This was a thinking man's horror film, Larry. Let's move on to some other films that you did. You did It Lives Again, the sequel to...
It's Alive.
It's Alive, thank you. And then you did Return to Salem's Lot. And The Stuff, which was about alien yogurt, I think, which people ate, if you recall, and people would almost explode as they would be taken over. Now, where did this idea come up?
For The Stuff?
For The Stuff.
Well, I felt that more people were dying from things that they ingested willingly than from anything else. I mean, every time you read in the newspaper, it turns out something else that we're eating is killing us.
Right.
So I figured that would be an interesting story to take all those elements and put it into this kind of a satirical thriller where people were eating this alien substance that actually was alive. And once they ate enough of it, it began to take over their whole system.
Right.
They didn't eat anything else but the stuff. That's all they ate. 8, 9 times a day, and they became what we called stuffies.
Stuffies.
Yeah.
That's right. And you know what else you're also known for? You're also known of using a lot of veteran actors, as well as this film. You used a lot of, I think, 50s veterans. But you always use like an actor, a character actor that is looking, you know, to be in a top-notch film. You usually give them work. And how do you go about finding these people?
Well, when I hear that there's somebody around who's good and he's not working, I try to give him something in the picture. In that particular film, we had Sam Levine, who's a great character actor, and I was fortunate to work with him. Later on in the years, we have director Sam Fuller appeared in one of my films. Later on, I gave a job to Betty Davis before she died.
And we'll talk about that.
So when I hear there's somebody around who's good, who I admired when I was a kid, I said, I'd like to work with these people. I'd like to give them a shot. And instead of honorary dinners, I'm sure they would all prefer a job.
That's right, and I'm sure they're very thankful for it, as well as I am, because I get to see these character actors. Let's take a look, another clip from God Told Me To, and we'll come right back, and this is where the cop meets the alien. Well, another shocking scene from God Told Me To.
We're seeing the whole picture here.
That's right.
We have to charge you a rental for this.
This is the only one this is yours, right? I mean, the other ones are owned by the studio, and I mean, this is your masterpiece.
This reverted back to us when the New World Pictures lost their rights to it after a certain number of years. We finally got a reversion on it.
Right.
So now it's going out again as a new release.
But this is the uncut. This is your cut, right? I mean, you had complete.
Well, there was no other cut. There was only one cut of the picture.
Well, you never know. Sometimes there might be. There's no hidden footage of the alien going around, is there?
No,
Okay.
no, this is the picture.
Okay, well, it's a masterpiece as it is. So I want to also ask you about, you did Wicked Stepmother with Bette Davis, but she was replaced, though, by Barbara Carrera, a woman much younger than her. How does that story go?
Well, it was the fact that she wasn't actually replaced. We rewrote the script because Betty was ill. After the first week or so, her dentures were broken, and she had to go back to New York to get them fixed up, and they found a couple of teeth that had to be pulled, and they had to do oral surgery. And unfortunately, she went down about 79 pounds, and she couldn't come back to work. So the question was, we're going to scrap the picture and start over again, or try and preserve what would probably be Bette Davis' last performance on the screen. So I talked MGM into keeping the Bette Davis footage and letting me rewrite the script so that Bette Davis, who's a witch, is able to turn herself into Barbara Carrera and try and seduce the husband in the household and use her beauty and her witchcraft instead of just Betty playing all the scenes. And then we had Betty come back towards the end of the picture, and it worked all right, and we managed to be able to keep the footage, and I'm glad we did, because otherwise there would have been this one less picture with Bette Davis.
Well, I was just curious about change, but thanks for clearing that up. When we come back from our next and final clip from God Told Me To, I want to talk about Q, okay, and what do you think right now about the home video horror business? Okay, so let's take a look at our last clip, the big confrontation from God Told Me To. Now, if that doesn't want to make you go out and rent the movie, nothing will.
I'm going to do it myself.
You just rent this tape, right?
That's it.
Listen, let's talk about Q, the great, I think one of the great modern-day monster movies about the winged serpent that flies around New York and decapitates people. How'd you shoot that around the Chrysler Building and get away with it and all that?
Well, I rented the Chrysler Building.
The whole building?
I rented the building. $18,000 a day, I think, was for the building. And they didn't still quite know what I was going to do, that we were going to actually have people hanging off the top of the building in baskets. I hired steeplejacks, people who were accustomed to walking on top of skyscrapers and doing repairs. And we dressed them up in the costumes as required and had 19 or 20 of those guys dangling off the top of the building. Because, you know, we couldn't afford to build the set, so we had to really shoot it about 88 stories above the street. I was up there on a cable myself with a stuntman whose job was to keep me from falling off the Chrysler Building, and he obviously succeeded.
Well, how do you say the word Q? What's the...
Q stands for Quetzalcoatl, which is the name of the bird god that comes to New York.
Now, did you see an earlier, I don't know if it's any coincidence, an earlier George Zucco film called The Flying Serpent?
No, I never saw that.
It's a fun old movie where he directs this old serpent to go around and kill people. I thought you might have saw that late night in a dream or something.
No, but in this bird doesn't get directed by anybody. It just does it on its own.
Oh, right. Okay, it just decapitates.
It eats people because it's hungry.
Right.
It's hungry, you know, and what better place to be in New York? People are sunbathing on rooftops, and there are guys washing windows on the Empire State Building that get taken away.
Right.
It was a fanciful idea, but once we started doing it, we had a great deal of fun making the picture, and of course, a lot of it was shot from helicopters swooping around the Twin Towers, and you
very
know,
stylish.
It was probably a moment of insanity on my part to want to make this picture because, you know, we were taking a lot of physical chances getting killed making this picture, but I guess that was my manic period.
Well, let's flash forward to right now. Currently in release is the movie Body Snatchers, which you are one of the writers. This is, I guess, the third updated version, I guess, or the remake of this. What can you say is more innovative or different than the past movies?
Well, the reason I got Warner Brothers to make this picture was I came to them with the idea of putting the pod people on a military base. where you can't really tell the pod people from the normal military because they're so closely parallel to one another. They like that idea, and also putting a lot of it in through the eyes of a child.
Right.
So we have a nursery school sequence where they're turning the children into pod people. I introduced 5 or 6 new elements to it, which finally convinced Warner Brothers that they should make the film.
Mm-hmm. Now let's jump right now to the home video business, where, as we know, horror films are just taking off. Have you ever considered making horror films just for home video at all?
Well, the last film that I directed was The Ambulance, which was with Eric Robertson, James Earl Jones, and Janine Turner, and that was released direct-to-video, world premiere video. Did very well, sold a lot. And it doesn't really matter to me where people see the film, because many times today people's television screen at home is almost as big as the screen in the miniplex theater that they happen to go to.
Right.
And the projection is sometimes poor and out of focus and scratched, and there's nobody in the theaters half the time anyway.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier.
So I see no problem if people want to watch the picture at home.
Fine.
And I think it's a perfectly viable marketplace for films. And we also have the pay-per-view and cable.
So your options are there. So
It doesn't matter to me where people see my movie. As a matter of fact, when you go to some of these miniplexes, you pay to see one movie and you hear 2 movies.
Right.
Because you hear the movie that's playing in the next theater as well. So
yeah, but my next lead-in was that. So then you then have projects then where, when they come up, you can decide whether they go straight to video, theatrical release, pay-per-view.
Well, I don't decide it truthfully. The people who finance the picture decide whether they want to put the picture out in theaters or whether they want to put the picture out on a home video, depending on the economics of the situation.
So let's just say, like, for example, maybe your next upcoming project, where do you see that, as a direct theatrical release or home video?
No, we're trying to do it as the theatrical release. But The Ambulance also, we had hoped to get a theatrical release on it. But when the numbers all came back in, it was apparent that since the picture had become very successful in Europe and had made a profit in Europe, and the company was already ahead, that they only stood a chance to lose by going out theatrically. If they went out on video, they were going to make more profits.
Right.
But if they went out theatrically and spent $7 or $8 million on advertising, they had a chance of losing the profits that they had made in foreign. It played theatrically all over Europe and did very, very well. So I saw the picture in theaters in Paris and Rome, and I saw it with audiences, and I had the pleasure of doing it. But unfortunately, not back here in the States.
Right. All right, let's jump right now to talking about some of your contemporaries who put out, well-quality horror films like Wes Craven or Brian De Palma. Do you ever see their films?
Sure, but Brian's not doing those kind of films anymore. Brian's success has come from directing an Al Pacino movie, or or directing something like The Untouchables. Basically, the films that Brian made, which were Brian De Palma pictures, really were never that successful box office-wise, and he's a very, very capable director. So he decided to just go out and direct other people's pictures.
Yeah, more mainstream, basically.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, as you continue, are you going to stay with the horror genre, or are you going to try to get out and go more mainstream? Or
Well, I never considered these pictures as horror pictures per se.
not straight horror pictures?
No,
but
because I've never gone in for Chainsaw Massacre kind of films. And when you talk about the violence that you saw, that's about as violent as I get.
it's realistic, you know.
Yeah, but
very
I
realistic.
don't like to do pictures where there's a lot of dismemberment and things like that. My films are generally based on character.
Right.
The performances are good. I try to get the best quality actors from Broadway and Hollywood, and most of the films, the characters are more important than the monster.
Right. So now let me ask you now, as any advice for any young filmmakers or people with a little money want to put out a horror film either straight to video, is there any kind of advice you can give them, or is there anything you can tell them at all, if they want to start their career?
And they want to make their own film?
They have a script, and maybe they have about 10 friends and a camera. Should they go ahead and do
I think they should go make their picture, absolutely. If you can't make it in 16 millimeter, then make it in 8 millimeter.
And go straight to video?
Yeah, because you can actually transfer 8 millimeter to a video, and it won't look that different, because you're not going to ever project the picture on a big screen anyway.
Well,
I mean, I've always shot 35, but if I was starting out now, I would take the equipment and I would shoot whatever I could shoot, rather than spend my time sitting around talking about it and lamenting the fact that people won't let me make a picture. The only person who's going to make a picture is you. If you want to make the picture, you will make the film.
Well,